What's up, guys? Welcome back to Newswave. So today we could take a look at Breath of the Wild running in like full 4K 60 frames per second, and now first person view. And what's interesting about the first person view is that they've also kind of split it up and turned it into like a VR mode and everything. There's some really cool stuff going on right now with the Breath of the Wild modding scene that we're going to take a look at. And there was also, strangely, a game that was pulled down from the eShop because it snuck an Easter egg in that I assume Nintendo was not happy with because of what it could potentially do to the Switch. We're going to talk about that and a bunch of other stuff today as well. As always, guys, enjoy these videos. Make sure to hit the like button. It does help out, and get subscribed. Do this every weekday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time, so you can get caught up on all the different news going around the gaming world. We're going to start today actually with Saints Row the Third. It's coming out on the Switch, of course, next month. I think in like 10 days it'll be out. And there's a lot of stuff going on here because they did release a gameplay trailer that is all running on the Switch. So if you want to see how it's running and everything, they actually recorded it in docked mode. You can see it here. It's of the kind of pretty much the opening of the game that you'll do where there's like a heist that you're running and you get caught at the end. But that was a pretty fun part of the game. And then they actually showed off a GameStop, seemingly a GameStop item, a GameStop exclusive, I guess. It's all over GameStop right now, so I assume it's an exclusive there. But the big thing here to look at is that the physical edition they have comes with a game case sleeve, the double-sided alternate inlay, so it does have like another alternate cover art, which is cool, a poster, thumb grips, console sticker sheets, all kinds of stuff, including a microfiber screen cloth. I did see this go up on pre-order at GameStop, like I said, but there's a good chance it'll probably go up pre-order other places as well. But the big thing here is to take a look at that. It's cool to see, of course, physical games get all these little extra things. I like getting the game with the sleeve and all the extra stuff. We don't always get a manual, but I mean, throwing in some extra stuff like that is pretty cool. And honestly, Saints Row the Third is a fun game overall. And since there's no Grand Theft Auto on the Switch, I get why a lot of people would probably pick this one up. Also, we got our Games with Gold announcement for May. And it's pretty underwhelming. It's probably, I think, looking at the worst month I think I've ever seen on Games with Gold. It's weird because you figure going into E3, you want there to be this massive amount of hype around the systems and everything. Instead, they kind of come out with this. They still, of course, have June to push a really good Games with Gold. And that's kind of what I'm hoping, is that this month is just junk because they're building up for June. I don't know. Look, here's the slide that they released on Twitter. And yeah, it's not great. It's Marooners, the Golf Club 2019, Earth Defense Force, which is actually a cool 360 game, but again, it's a 360 game, and then an Xbox arcade game, Comic Jumper. Yeah, that's not good. I guess if you're a golf fan, but that's like the back half of the month. There's nothing really right away that looks good there. So very, very disappointed myself, and I'm sure a lot of other people, I saw some people online kind of annoyed at it as well. Games with Gold, it's not a good month in May. So if you were looking at the Games with Gold stuff and saying, oh, cool, maybe I'll sign up for Xbox Live in May or something because maybe they'll have something good. No, don't even worry about it. Maybe Game Pass will surprise us in May at some point with some cool stuff. But Games with Gold, not exactly pushing subscriptions this month. Also, if you're playing Mortal Kombat 11 on the PC, you might have noticed some weird things. Specifically, the ultra widescreen support isn't exactly there, the 21:9 widescreen support. The fact that they cap certain scenes at 30 frames per second, I believe fatalities, the crypt, kind of the intro sequences, the menu, that stuff's all capped at 30 frames per second. It's kind of odd. Well, leave it to modders because they already fixed it. That's right, there's a full YouTube video of it showing it off as you're seeing here. And this is actually put up by Endry Lawson, and it does show 60 frames per second menus, intros, fatalities, crypt. Basically, they just blew all that up, so you don't have any of those weird limitations that I don't really know why it was there in the first place, unless it was scripted to be that, and it would have sped up the gameplay rather than just, you know, I guess go at normal speed. That's the only thing I think of. But like menus at 30 frames, a crypt at 30 frames, that's just all weird stuff. It's strange. And this is once again another situation where modders are fixing something that the NetherRealm stuff should have had. That should have been anything to fix right there. Ultra widescreen support, that should have been there for a big budget game like that. Of course, uncapped frame rates at certain times. At least 60 frames per second. Trust me, it's already jarring enough if you play on the other systems where like the frame rate's weird at times because it jumps between 30 and 60 even during like with the killing blows and stuff, or the heavy blows they have and everything. That'll shift around too, so weird stuff. But hey, leave it to modders, they'll take care of it. And guys, some of the quick news out of the way, let's get into the bigger stuff. We're going to start with a very interesting story that has now come out around Sony's censorship policies. If you have been completely living under a rock for a little while now, you may have missed the fact that there's been a lot of allegations around Sony and possibly censoring games, and it became very obvious with certain releases. Devil May Cry seemed to go to the top with a certain scene that was kind of seemingly blurred out with light, but then there was another scene in the other systems that had light as well. But then we started to hear from developers like Xseed and others that Sony just outright said, you can't do this on our system, you gotta change it. And then the Wall Street Journal put out a massive article that kind of exposed that they have guidelines and all this stuff now that's different from before, except strangely, it seems like Sony Japan is saying something different. At least a Japanese representative said something completely different. It was translated, and now here we are. And the idea here is GameSpark published a report, and it was a follow-up from the article from the Wall Street Journal, and it seems to point out that they have not actually had any changes with rules or policies or anything for sexual imagery. It hasn't been introduced at all internally. In fact, it seems that the company's policy is executives check games on a case-by-case basis, and obviously in rare occasions, as they say, rare cases, they will consider that certain things are too offensive and ask publishers, developers, whoever, to change it. This is odd because the Wall Street Journal said one thing, actually had seemingly representatives say something completely different, and now Sony's saying something different as well. However, one points out issues in the West and the other one points out seemingly issues in Japan, because remember, whenever we hear about these things, it always seems to be Sony US, basically, Sony Western, Sony basically is censoring this stuff here. Not necessarily in Japan. We always hear about that. Oh, in Japan it won't be censored, but here it will be. So I feel like there is a bit of a disconnect there between the company overall and then obviously the companies below them in Sony based on region. It's kind of like how we deal with Nintendo. Nintendo America, they don't call any shots really. Sometimes they'll do some things like, remember the Starlink stuff seemed to be from Reggie and Nintendo America. And then Nintendo in Japan is like their own thing, and they always tell them what to do, but there is a massive disconnect there. So it's an odd situation right now, but we always hear about developers saying, hey, we have to change this because a certain company that starts with an S, ends with a Y, there's an N in there, and they told us that we have to change this stuff up because it doesn't meet their requirements, their standards that they're trying to apply. Now, all of a sudden, I mean, when Dead or Alive released before, it was fine, and now it releases and they have to change out the lotion for some reason. Yeah, so odd things happening there, and Sony's not exactly making things any clearer. Next up, let's talk about an Easter egg that got an entire game ripped down from the eShop, seemingly for fear of what I would assume to be exploits, or just messing with the code, or just not telling Nintendo this was in there. This was a really weird situation. I don't think anything I've ever seen before, like, ever really. To sneak something like this into a game is just odd, but here we are. And this is actually from a game that is called A Dark Room. It's a text-based adventure, and it was on the Switch earlier this month in April. And what's weird is it turns out the person who actually basically ported it over, developed it for the Switch, ended up putting in, it's so weird, a Ruby interpreter and code editor. Like, why would that be in there? He seems to say in his own follow-up, saying, "Dear Ruby devs and game devs, I have a crazy announcement I want to share. Please boost. Last week I released Dark Room to the Nintendo Switch. Within the game, I also shipped a Ruby interpreter and a code editor as an Easter egg. And basically what it does, it turns every consumer spec Nintendo Switch into a Ruby machine." And then he goes on further to say that, yeah, I had to remove it. I had to remove the game because I got in trouble with Nintendo. And people might be wondering, why would Nintendo get mad about there being a code editor in a game? And honestly, it could have to do with Nintendo not being happy that they were not informed about this. That's something I can completely understand there. I want to know everything about this game, what's in here, what are we selling on the eShop. Although there are some questionable things on the eShop right now when it comes to games. But you're putting a code editor in there, something that could potentially open up exploits on the system. Now, the thing about games generally is they will launch in basically what's called a sandbox, so they are kind of walled off from the main OS and taking administrator privileges and everything to then do all kinds of stuff to the Switch. Basically, it's not an entry point, really. I mean, technically it's not. There are ways for some people to get out of the sandbox per se, but for the most part, it's not usually something that takes place, and that's not even generally where they'll look for those kind of entry points. However, we have seen, of course, some games allow entry points. Remember with the original Xbox, you have Splinter Cell? Well, you can mod your Xbox all of a sudden. In this case, that would not have happened. However, the game had to come down. He showed massive regret, and I don't know if it's going back up because it seemed like he kind of coded that one in there, and Nintendo might just be wary and say, hey, look, we got so many games on the eShop. We don't really need this. But either way, weird situation. And I don't really know why it had to be in there other than the fact that he said that he wanted it to be a fun little thing. You plug in a keyboard, you hit the tilde key, and all of a sudden you're coding. I guess he just wanted to throw in an Easter egg because he liked the coding so much, the language so much, and he wanted to put it in there, but still, not really worth risking your entire game over, but now people know. Next up, let's talk about Zelda Breath of the Wild and first-person mode, and this is on PC. Of course, if you have Cemu and you have a way to play Zelda on your PC, which I hope that means that you've bought the Wii U copy, because the emulator is legal, but downloading ROMs without owning the game is not legal, and so hopefully you bought the Wii U version, and at that point, yeah, go crazy. I don't think most people really care at that point because you've supported the game. But what's really cool about this whole situation is the game has continued to evolve. I mean, we saw a while ago it was playable on PC, and people thought that was really, really neat, but they continue to work on it. At this point, it is a 4K 60 frames per second game on PC, and has been seeing all kinds of crazy mods. They put different characters in there, and now they're also making it first person, which is really, really cool. So instead of obviously being third person with Link on the field, all of a sudden you're seeing things through Link's perspective. It's really cool because when you go up to an enemy and you target them, you'll then shift out in the third person so you can see around and everything. This was actually shown off really well by BSOD Gaming on YouTube, and you can actually see them playing it there, and it's a really, really cool modification. What's really neat though is it's gone a step further, and they've decided to take the first person view, do the split like you do with VR in the two circles, and all of a sudden, yeah, you have Breath of the Wild VR, a bit better than what we're used to with something something like what we've seen with, of course, Labo, where it's a much lower resolution, for example. This would work better. They'd have to make sure the head tracking and stuff is spot on as well so that it would interact correctly. But just from the fact that you're playing at a high resolution, a good frame rate and everything, it would probably be a better experience. Of course, it would also cost a bit more because to have 4K 60 each eye and everything, you'd probably have a pretty good PC, essentially. So it's not a cheap endeavor. And then, of course, you're also stationary, so you don't have the Switch's portability factor to throw in there. But I like seeing these really cool modifications with Breath of the Wild. I mean, Breath of the Wild on PC shows what it would basically look like, I guess, on like an Xbox One X then, and it looks amazing. So if you haven't had a chance, I would at least go look at the video. It's tagged down below, and just kind of see what this game could look like, because you never know. Maybe Nintendo ends up taking Breath of the Wild and porting it to the next Switch, and it's able to do much, maybe closer to 4K and stuff, and who knows, maybe we're looking at a game that will actually get 10 years from now, and we don't even realize it. And our last bit of news, let's quickly talk about World War Z, because they put out some sales numbers, and this actually has some interesting information pertaining to the Epic Store, as a lot of people have been interested if it's worth going to the Epic Store for exclusivity, because of course you're losing the ability to sell on Steam. Well, it turns out World War Z has done pretty well. It's done seemingly above expectations, as they put out a tweet saying that they had sold 1 million copies at this point. And that, of course, is on PS4, Xbox, and PC. And then Epic chimed in with this tweet that you're seeing here, congratulating them, and then saying that selling over 250,000 units of World War Z so far on the Epic Game Store. So they have sold 25% or a quarter of their copies just on the Epic Store. Of course, they get an 88-12 split, which is much better than what they get on the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One, so also factor that in. And yeah, they're probably making pretty good money on the Epic Store, despite, I guess, not releasing on Steam at that point, right? That's the big thing, is that you forego Steam, there's a chance you're going to miss out on a lot of sales. But selling 250,000 units already? I mean, it hasn't been out that long, like a month or so, if that, right? It's been a couple weeks mostly, and yeah, to sell that many on just the Epic Store kind of starts to shut down the Steam idea that you need to be on Steam or you're not going to sell a ton. And 88-12 split basically means they would have sold, I guess at that point, they made more money than they would on Steam, even if they sold like 300,000 copies. So yeah, something to think about there. The Epic Game Store seems to be picking up momentum, so I wonder if is Steam going to do anything yet? And to finish up with our comment of the day from yesterday, this one, as you're seeing here, is actually from Daniel saying, Days Gone is pretty good for a B-tier Sony exclusive. So you say B-tier, I get what you're saying there because, of course, Sony Bend Studios, they mostly worked on handheld stuff like the Vita, for example, with Uncharted. So the way I'm looking at it right now, Days Gone is seen as an average game, but I think a lot of that has to do with the high expectations around Sony's, like their Sony console exclusives, their first party stuff, right? I mean, we just had God of War and then Spider-Man, release. Great games, phenomenal games. And here comes Days Gone. It could be average, obviously, but when you kind of compare it to those, it looks even worse. So I have a feeling Days Gone, I haven't played it yet, but based on the reviews and stuff, it does seem like people are just expecting a lot from Sony when it comes to these releases. And the fact that Last of Us 2 is coming and Days Gone looks like a Last of Us game, technically, the setting and everything, I think there's a lot of expectations around these releases. And if it doesn't meet those high expectations, it comes in at a 72 on Metacritic, and people kind of pass on by it. I'll play it eventually, just not now. So maybe, I don't know, a few months down the line. I think it's going to fall in price kind of quick. But hey, it's sold well, and honestly, people who are playing it seem to be having fun with it, so that's good. Ladies and gentlemen, let's go do it here for Newswave. If you enjoyed this video, guys, hit the like button. Really helps out. If not, hit the dislike. Leave comments down below about everything we talked about, whether it's the Zelda first-person mode, the 4K 60 that you have on PC now. How do you think that looks? I think it looks pretty cool, but let me know what you think about that down below. And then what about Sony and censorship? This whole situation seems confusing. Sony is basically saying that they've had these guidelines, they just maybe haven't enforced them as much because it's case by case, but it does seem like it's not going to get any better, seemingly, with places like Xseed speaking out heavily about it. Thanks, guys, for watching, and I'll see you next time.